The isolation pushed her to a breaking point she hadn't known existed. She began to retreat from everyone, even the friends she had maintained, because trust felt like a fragile, brittle thing that could shatter at the slightest touch. Nights were the hardest. The silence in her small apartment was oppressive, every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren, every passing car reminded her of how utterly alone she had become. And yet, amid the despair, a spark of determination quietly lit itself in her heart. She realized she couldn't rely on anyone to save her, not her family, not friends, not anyone who had promised support. Survival demanded that she stand up for herself, that she face the weight of abandonment and still find a way forward. And so, trembling and exhausted, she began to consider something she had never allowed herself to think before. Perhaps the only way to reclaim her life was to stop giving it away to those who refused to value it and start building something for herself. She sat alone in the dim light, staring at the walls she had cleaned and decorated for everyone else's comfort, realizing for the first time that none of it was hers. Her little brother slept peacefully in his room, unaware of the storm raging inside her. She wanted to scream, to knock on the walls and make someone hear the desperation that had been building for years. But no sound came. She thought of the phone calls ignored, the messages left unanswered, the hollow promises that had turned into silence. Every sacrifice she had made flashed through her mind, the early mornings, the skipped meals, the nights spent comforting someone else while she cried in secret. And now, the truth she had avoided for so long settled over her like a suffocating blanket, the people she had given her life to. The ones she had trusted above all else, had abandoned her when she needed them the most. The betrayal cut deeper than she ever imagined possible, yet it was the first step toward understanding that her life, her worth, and her future could no longer depend on anyone else. The first night she allowed herself to sleep without worrying about anyone else, she woke to a strange, almost alien sense of calm. For the first time in years, she felt the absence of everyone else not as abandonment, but as space to breathe, to think, to be. She sat on the edge of her bed, tracing the lines on her hands, thinking about every sacrifice she had made, every moment she had given herself to someone else. Slowly, a thought crystallized: maybe she didn't need anyone's approval, anyone's gratitude, or anyone's presence to exist. Survival demanded that she stand up for herself, that she face the weight of abandonment and still find a way forward. Trembling and exhausted, she began to consider something she had never allowed herself before. Perhaps the only way to reclaim her life was to stop giving it away to those who refused to value it and start building something for herself. The next morning, she started small. A walk around the block, breathing in the crisp air of early spring, feeling sunlight on her face she had forgotten existed. She remembered the smell of freshly baked bread from the bakery nearby, the distant laughter of children at a playground, and something inside her shifted. For the first time, she realized life could still hold beauty even when it had abandoned her in other ways. She began journaling, listing things she wanted to do for herself, things she had deferred, dreams she had postponed. Every word she wrote felt like a promise to herself, a reclaiming of a life that had always belonged to her. And in that small act of writing, the first step of true independence emerged, a realization that her story wasn't over, that she could rise from the ashes of betrayal and neglect, and in doing so, redefine what it meant to be loved and valued. Weeks passed, and she began to rebuild quietly. Freelance jobs, night classes, rediscovered passions, all tiny bricks building a life she had never allowed herself to live. And as she saw progress, she noticed something remarkable: the people who had abandoned her began to look in, but she no longer sought their attention or approval. She had learned that validation from others could never replace the strength she now nurtured within herself. And the memory of betrayal remained, a scar she would carry forever, reminding her of both her vulnerability and her resilience. In her solitude, she discovered the most profound truth of all: the moments we think will break us often shape the strongest, most unyielding parts of who we are. If this story inspires you, hit subscribe to Grindmode Stories by Daniel. These are real stories about people who have been pushed to the edge, abandoned, and yet found the strength to rise. Stay with me, because the most shocking, chilling revelation of this story, the part that will stay with you long after the video ends, is coming, and it's a lesson about justice, courage, and the human spirit that you won't forget. She reflected on the nights she had spent crying alone, on the moments she had wished for a helping hand that never came, and on the years she had given without asking. And yet, in her newfound independence, she realized that those very hardships had forged her into someone stronger than she had ever imagined. Every tear, every pang of loneliness, every pang of betrayal became fuel that propelled her forward into opportunities she had once thought impossible. She began to see her past not as a series of failures or sacrifices that went unnoticed, but as the foundation upon which she would build a life defined not by others' demands, but by her own values, dreams, and courage. And while the scars remained, they were no longer symbols of pain, they were symbols of survival, of awakening, and of a journey that was just beginning. Months later, she found herself standing at a crossroads, both literally and metaphorically. The life she had built quietly, piece by piece, was starting to bloom. She had gained confidence, independence, and a sense of worth she had never known before. And yet, one evening, a letter arrived, a letter she had long expected but feared to open. It was from her family, the same ones who had abandoned her in the darkest moments of her life. Their words were filled with apologies, regret, and explanations for their absence, but they came too late. She read the letter slowly, letting every sentence sink in, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and, surprisingly, relief. The twist was not just that they had abandoned her, it was the realization that her survival and transformation had happened entirely without them. The people who once defined her world were now spectators, watching someone they had once overlooked rise into her own power. She smiled faintly, a smile that carried years of pain, struggle, and endurance. For the first time, she understood something essential: the true measure of love, loyalty, and self-worth isn't in how much you give to others, but in how fiercely you protect your own heart, even when the world turns its back. The justice she had sought wasn't external, it was internal. She had reclaimed herself, and that alone was victory. And in that moment, she made a decision: she would never again allow anyone else to define her value. She would continue to give, to love, and to live, but always on her own terms, never sacrificing her peace for someone else's convenience. If this story resonates with you, subscribe to Grindmode Stories by Daniel. These stories are for people who have given everything, faced betrayal, and still found the courage to rise. And tell me in the comments, if you were in her shoes, would you forgive? Or would you walk away forever? I want to know how you would survive when the people you love abandon you. The nights she once dreaded, filled with loneliness and despair, became her sanctuary. She learned to enjoy her own company, to find joy in small victories, and to create a life that was entirely hers. And yet, the lingering question that had haunted her for years, why did they leave, remained unanswered in the most unsettling way. Because sometimes, the most painful betrayals have no explanation. Sometimes, people leave not because of anything you did, but because their own lives are too small, too fragile, or too selfish to hold your greatness. And that, she realized, was not her failure, it was theirs. Her journey culminated in a quiet triumph. She began helping others who had faced similar betrayals, using her story as both a warning and a beacon. She shared her experiences, offering guidance, strength, and hope to people who felt invisible, abandoned, or forgotten. And in doing so, she transformed her pain into purpose. The chilling part of her story, the abandonment that cut deeper than any knife, became the very foundation for her greatest achievements. If you've been abandoned, hurt, or overlooked, remember, your story isn't over. Subscribe to Grindmode Stories by Daniel to discover more stories of resilience, justice, and triumph. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that even in betrayal, even in silence, survival and greatness are possible. And comment below, what would you do if the people you loved abandoned you? Would you crumble, or rise stronger than ever? She had given her life to others, and they had abandoned her. But in the end, she discovered the ultimate truth: the strongest love, the most powerful justice, and the deepest freedom always begin within. And that is how she survived, how she rose, and how she finally became the author of her own life.